4 German shepherds was found. Inside a collapsed tunnel, what baby did. Next left everyone in tears. The mountain was screaming. That's what 5-year-old Ethan told his grandfather when the ground shook that morning, sending their coffee cups dancing across the kitchen table. What this little boy would do in the next 12 hours would leave an entire town sobbing, change the lives of 4 heroic dogs, and prove that sometimes the smallest hands can lift the heaviest burdens. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Walter Morrison had raised Ethan alone for 3 years now, ever since the car accident that took Ethan's parents on a rainy November night. The 68-year-old man, with hands roughened by decades of construction work, had never expected to be changing diapers again at his age, teaching a toddler to tie his shoes, or explaining why mommy and daddy couldn't come home. But life had other plans, and Walter had learned that love doesn't follow schedules or convenience. Their small mountain town of Cedar Ridge sat nestled between 2 ranges. Population barely 3,000 on a good day. The kind of place where everyone knew your name, your business, and what you had for dinner last Tuesday. The abandoned Hollowbrook mine had been closed for 20 years, its entrance sealed after a series of accidents made it too dangerous to maintain. The tunnel system ran deep into the mountain, a maze of passages that old-timers said stretched for miles underground. That morning started like any other, except for the rain. 3 days of torrential downpour had turned the streets into rivers, and Walter watched nervously as water cascaded down the mountainside in brown torrents. "We should check the basement," he muttered, more to himself than to Ethan, who sat at the table drawing pictures of dogs, always dogs, with his colored pencils. "The mountain hurts, Grandpa," Ethan said suddenly, his green eyes wide and serious in a way that always made Walter's chest tighten. The boy had always been different, special in ways that Walter couldn't quite explain. While other children played with toy trucks and watched cartoons, Ethan would sit for hours watching birds through the window, claiming he understood their songs. The pediatrician said it was just an active imagination, but Walter wasn't so sure. Thunder cracked overhead, so loud that the windows rattled. Ethan dropped his pencil, and it rolled across the floor. "We need to go outside," the boy said, already sliding off his chair. "Absolutely not," Walter replied, catching Ethan by the shoulder. "That storm could knock trees down. We're staying right here where it's safe." But Ethan's face had taken on that stubborn expression Walter knew too well. The same look his mother used to get when she'd made up her mind about something. "Someone needs help, Grandpa." "They're crying." "That's just the wind, buddy." "Sometimes storms make sounds that—" "Not the wind!" Ethan's voice rose, trembling with urgency. "They're scared and hurt, and they can't get out." Tears welled in his eyes, and Walter felt his resolve weakening. The boy rarely cried, had been eerily composed even at his parents' funeral, but when he did get upset, it was always about someone or something in pain. Lightning flashed, illuminating the kitchen in stark white light, and in that moment, Walter heard it too. Faint, almost lost in the storm's fury, but unmistakable once you knew to listen for it. A sound that didn't belong to wind or rain or thunder. It was coming from the direction of the old mine. "Get your raincoat," Walter said, already reaching for his own. He couldn't explain why he was giving in to a 5-year-old's intuition, except that Ethan had never been wrong about these things before. Like the time he'd insisted they check on Mrs. Chen next door, and they'd found her collapsed from a stroke, barely conscious. Or when he'd refused to let Walter drive down Canyon Road one evening, crying, until Walter took the long way home, only to learn later that a rock slide had crushed 2 cars on that exact stretch of road. They stepped out into the storm, and the rain hit them like a physical force. Walter held Ethan's hand tightly as they made their way up the muddy path toward the mine entrance. The boy moved with purpose, pulling Walter along despite the older man's longer stride. Water ran in sheets down the mountainside, turning the trail into a treacherous river of mud and debris. "Ethan, slow down!" Walter shouted over the storm, but the boy pressed forward, his small boots splashing through puddles that came up to his knees. They rounded a bend in the path, and Walter's heart nearly stopped. The entrance to the Hollowbrook mine, which had been sealed with concrete and steel 20 years ago, was gone. In its place was a gaping hole where the entire structure had collapsed inward, leaving a pile of rubble and twisted metal. Part of the mountain itself seemed to have given way, creating a landslide that had torn open the old tunnel system. "There!" Ethan pointed to a gap in the debris, barely visible through the rain. "They're in there!" Before Walter could stop him, Ethan had wrenched free and was scrambling over the wet rocks. "Ethan, no!" The whole thing could come down. But as Walter followed, he heard it clearly now. Not one voice, but several. Barking, dogs, trapped somewhere in that collapsing tunnel. And then he saw them. Or, rather, their eyes reflecting in the dim light, filtering through the storm clouds. 4 pairs of eyes, watching them from behind a wall of fallen rocks and timber. German shepherds. 4 of them, pressed against what remained of an inner tunnel wall. Even from a distance, Walter could see they weren't ordinary dogs. They wore tactical harnesses, military grade from the look of them. With numbers and insignia he couldn't quite make out through the rain and mud. "Hey there," Ethan called softly, his voice somehow carrying despite the storm. He approached the debris pile slowly, his hands extended. "We're here to help. Don't be scared." The largest dog, a female from what Walter could tell, let out a low whine that seemed to go straight through Walter's chest. There was something desperately intelligent in those amber eyes, something that spoke of training and purpose and terrible urgency. "Ethan, get back," Walter warned, pulling out his phone to call 911. But there was no signal, the storm having knocked out the cell tower. He tried again, holding the phone up, searching for even one bar of reception. "Her name is Luna," Ethan said suddenly, and Walter nearly dropped his phone. "What? How could you possibly know that?" Ethan didn't answer, his attention entirely focused on the dogs. He was at the debris now, his small hands touching the rocks gently. "Luna says there's someone else, someone deeper inside. He's hurt real bad, Grandpa. He can't move." Walter's blood ran cold. If someone was trapped deeper in that tunnel system, with the storm weakening whatever structure remained, he looked at the way the rocks were positioned, how the timber beams groaned under the weight. This wasn't just dangerous, it was a death trap waiting to spring. "We need to get help," Walter said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew it would be too late. Emergency services would take at least an hour to get here in this weather, assuming they could get through it all. The roads were probably washed out by now. Luna barked, sharp and urgent, and the other 3 dogs joined in. They were younger, Walter realized, probably 2 or 3 years old compared to Luna's 5 or 6. They moved as a unit, disciplined despite their obvious distress. "She says his name is David," Ethan continued, his voice distant and focused. "He's their person." They were training when the first collapse happened 2 weeks ago. The boy's eyes went wide. 2 weeks, Grandpa? He's been down there for 2 weeks. That couldn't be right. No one could survive that long trapped in a mine. But the dog's condition suggested otherwise. They were thin, but not starving, dirty, but not injured. Someone had been taking care of them, or they'd been taking care of themselves and someone else. A truck engine roared through the storm, and Walter turned to see a battered Ford pulling up the trail. Marcus Webb jumped out, a local construction worker Walter knew from town. The man was built like a linebacker, arms thick as tree trunks, wearing a hard hat and carrying a toolbox. "Walt, saw you heading up here and figured you'd lost your mind," Marcus shouted, jogging over. Then he saw the collapsed mine entrance and whistled low. "Jesus Christ! When did this happen?" "Don't know, but there are dogs trapped, and Ethan says there's a man deeper inside." Marcus looked skeptical until Luna barked again, and this time there was no mistaking the intelligence in it. The dog was clearly trained, clearly trying to communicate something vital. "Military dogs," Marcus said, recognizing the harnesses. "Search and rescue, from the look of them." He studied the debris pile with a professional eye. "This is unstable as hell, Walt. One wrong move and the whole mountain could come down on top of them." "Luna says there's a safe path," Ethan interrupted, pointing to a section of the collapse that looked no different from any other to Walter's eyes. "She's been going in and out for 2 weeks, bringing him water." The other dogs too, Max, Rex, and Scout. They take turns staying with David so he's never alone. Marcus and Walter exchanged glances. There was no way a 5-year-old could know the dogs' names. No way he could know about someone named David, unless... "Kid's right about one thing," Marcus said, shining his flashlight into the gap. "There are tracks here. Fresh ones going in and out. These dogs have been navigating this collapse." He looked at Luna with newfound respect. Smart girl. Military training's no joke. Thunder crashed overhead, and a chunk of rock fell from the unstable ceiling of the exposed tunnel. They all jumped back, but Luna immediately darted forward, barking urgently at the gap. "She says we don't have much time," Ethan translated, though Walter had no idea how the boy was doing it. "The rain is making everything weak. David's space is getting smaller." Marcus was already pulling equipment from his truck. "I've got some basic shoring materials, but this needs a full rescue team." "No time," Walter said, making a decision that went against every instinct he had about keeping Ethan safe. "If someone's really in there, we have to try." They worked quickly, Marcus using his expertise to identify which rocks could be moved safely and which were load-bearing. The three younger dogs, Max, Rex, and Scout, if Ethan was right, watched intently, occasionally barking when Marcus reached for a stone that made Luna nervous. "It's like they understand what we're doing," Marcus muttered, sweat mixing with rain on his face despite the cold. "They do," Ethan said simply. "They're very smart. David trained them special." As they cleared a path, inch by painful inch, Luna suddenly darted through a gap they'd created. She disappeared into the darkness, and Ethan made to follow before Walter caught him. "Absolutely not. You're not going in there. But Luna says—" "I don't care what Luna says." Walter's voice cracked with fear. He'd already lost his daughter. He couldn't lose Ethan too. Luna reappeared, something in her mouth. She dropped it at Ethan's feet, a wallet, water-damaged but intact. Marcus picked it up, opened it, and his face went pale. Sergeant David Chen, U.S. Army K-9 unit, he showed them the military ID. "This is real. There's really someone in there." Luna barked again, then turned and headed back into the tunnel. This time, she stopped just inside, looking back at them, waiting. "She wants us to follow," Ethan said unnecessarily. Marcus tested the stability of what they had cleared. "It's not safe, but it's possible." "I'll go." "No," Walter said. "I'm smaller than you. I'll fit through tighter spaces." "Grandpa, you have bad knees," Ethan pointed out with a child's brutal honesty. "And your back hurts when it rains." Before either adult could stop him, Ethan had slipped past them and followed Luna into the tunnel. Walter's heart stopped, and he lunged after the boy, but Marcus caught his arm. "Wait. Look." The three younger dogs had formed a protective formation around Ethan, Max in front, Rex and Scout on either side. They moved as a unit, slowly but deliberately, following Luna's lead through the darkness. "Those dogs won't let anything happen to him," Marcus said with wonder. "Look at how they're positioned. They're protecting him." Walter wanted to scream, to rush in and drag Ethan out, but he knew that panicking could trigger a collapse. Instead, he followed carefully, Marcus behind him with a flashlight. The tunnel was a nightmare of broken stone and splintered wood. Water dripped from above, and every few seconds, something shifted with an ominous grinding sound. But Luna moved with confidence, taking paths that seemed impossible until you were right on top of them. She'd squeeze through gaps that looked too small, always checking that Ethan was following. "It's getting warmer," Ethan called back. "Luna says that's good. It means we're getting close to where David made his safe spot." They'd been moving through the collapsed tunnel for maybe 10 minutes, though it felt like hours, when Luna stopped and barked 3 times. The sound echoed strangely, suggesting a larger space ahead. Walter squeezed through a final gap and found himself in what had once been a supply room, maybe 15 feet square. Mining equipment lined one wall, and emergency supplies, some opened, most not, were stacked in a corner. But what made Walter's breath catch was the man lying on a makeshift bed of open sleeping bags and emergency blankets. Sergeant David Chen looked like death warmed over. His left leg was clearly broken, splinted with what looked like pickaxe handles and torn fabric. His Asian features were gaunt, cheekbones sharp under skin that had taken on a grayish pallor. But his eyes were open, aware, and filled with tears as he watched his dogs surround him. "Luna," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Good girl. Such a good girl." Ethan knelt beside him without hesitation, his small hand finding David's. "We're here to help. Luna brought us. She's been taking care of you, hasn't she?" David's eyes widened, focusing on the child with difficulty. 2 weeks, he managed. Earthquake, training exercise. Ceiling came down. He tried to sit up and gasped in pain. "My dogs, save my dogs first." "We're saving everyone," Ethan said firmly. "Luna told me about the puppies." Walter and Marcus both turned to stare at the boy. David's expression was one of complete shock. How could you know? Ethan pointed to Luna, whose belly, now that Walter looked closely, was indeed slightly swollen despite her thin condition. She told me. She's scared the puppies won't make it if she doesn't get help soon. She's only 6 weeks along, David whispered. The vet just confirmed it the day before we... He trailed off, coughing weakly. Marcus was already assessing the situation with professional eyes. We need to move him, but that leg... If it's been 2 weeks, there could be infection. Moving him wrong could kill him. The tunnel's going to collapse, Ethan said suddenly, his eyes going wide. Luna says the water from the storm is making the ceiling crack. We have maybe 20 minutes. As if to emphasize his words, a deep rumble echoed through the mountain, and dust rained down from above. One of the support beams cracked audibly. We need a stretcher, Walter said, his mind racing. Something to keep him stable while we move him. Marcus was already moving, grabbing a sheet of corrugated metal from the mining equipment. This'll work. Help me pat it. They worked frantically, using sleeping bags and emergency blankets to create a makeshift stretcher. David tried to help, but even small movements made him gasp in agony. The dogs watched anxiously, Luna licking David's face whenever he showed signs of distress. Listen, David managed to say as they prepared to move him. If something happens, if the tunnel collapses, you take my dogs and run. Promise me. Nothing's going to happen, Walter said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Promise me, David's voice cracked with desperation. They're heroes. All of them. They've saved 17 people in 3 years. They deserve to live. We all deserve to live, Ethan said quietly. And we're all getting out. Luna says so. They lifted David as carefully as possible, but he still screamed in pain before biting down on his own sleeve to muffle the sound. The journey back through the tunnel was a nightmare. Every step had to be calculated, every movement careful not to disturb the precarious balance of rocks above them. The younger dogs proved their training and intelligence at every turn. Max would scout ahead, checking stability. Rex and Scout positioned themselves to help support the stretcher when the humans needed to navigate particularly difficult sections. And Luna stayed by David's head, her presence seeming to give him the strength to endure the agony of being moved. They were halfway back when it happened. A massive crack echoed through the tunnel, and the ceiling began to buckle. Rocks started falling, small ones at first, then larger chunks. Move! Move! Marcus shouted, abandoning caution for speed. They scrambled forward, David crying out with each jostle of the stretcher. A rock the size of a basketball crashed down inches from Walter's head. Another struck Rex in the shoulder, sending the dog tumbling with a yelp of pain. Rex! Ethan cried, but Max was already there, helping his packmate to his feet. The dog was limping but moving, determination overriding injury. The entrance was just ahead, gray daylight visible through the gap they'd cleared, but the tunnel was collapsing faster now, a rolling wave of destruction following them. Go! 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 Marcus roared. They burst from the tunnel into the storm, stumbling and falling in the mud as the mountain seemed to exhale behind them. The tunnel system collapsed completely, thousands of tons of rock sealing it forever. Where the entrance had been, there was now only a solid wall of rubble. David was unconscious, his breathing shallow and rapid. Rex was holding his right front paw up, whimpering softly. Luna pressed against Ethan, her whole body trembling from exhaustion and fear. We need an ambulance, Walter gasped, pulling out his phone again. This time, miraculously, he had 1 bar of signal. His fingers shook as he dialed 911. While Walter made the call, Marcus checked David's pulse. He's going into shock. We need to keep him warm and get his leg elevated. Ethan had taken off his raincoat and was draping it over David, his small face set with determination. The dogs arranged themselves around their handler, sharing their body heat. Even injured Rex limped over to lie against David's side. They kept him alive for 2 weeks, Marcus said in amazement. Look! He pointed to the supplies visible through the collapsed entrance. They must have been bringing him water in that helmet, probably found ways to open the emergency rations. These aren't just dogs, they're heroes. Patricia Reeves arrived before the ambulance, which was struggling to navigate the washed-out roads. The structural engineer took one look at the collapsed mine and shook her head in disbelief. You got someone out of there? That's impossible. The entire structure is compromised, has been for years. Tell that to them, Walter said, gesturing to the 4 German shepherds maintaining their vigil around David. Patricia knelt beside Luna, studying her tactical vest. These are military identification numbers. This is a certified search and rescue team. She looked at David's unconscious form with new respect. He must have been investigating the old reports of sounds from the mine. There were rumors someone might have been trapped in a lower level during the original closure, but the company said it was just settling noises. Luna says there was someone, Ethan piped up, but they were already gone when David found them. That's why the ceiling fell. He went too deep trying to reach them. Patricia stared at the boy. How could you possibly know that? Before anyone could answer, the ambulance finally arrived, followed by a veterinary emergency vehicle that Marcus had thought to request. The paramedics immediately began working on David, starting IV fluids and carefully immobilizing his leg. Severe dehydration, possible sepsis from the leg injury, one paramedic called out. We need to move him now. As they loaded David onto a proper stretcher, Luna tried to follow, barking anxiously when the paramedics gently pushed her back. She needs to go with him, Ethan said urgently. She won't understand why he's leaving. She'll think she failed to protect him. The lead paramedic, a woman named Janet, whom Walter recognized from town, looked at the boy with surprise. Honey, we can't take dogs in the ambulance. Then I'll take them, Doctor, Sarah Klein announced, having just arrived in the veterinary vehicle. The young vet was already assessing Rex's injury. They all need medical attention anyway, and they're military animals. They have rights to treatment. She looked at Luna's swollen belly with concern. Especially this one. The stress could cause her to miscarry. No! Ethan's voice was sharp with fear. The puppies have to be okay. Luna fought so hard to keep them safe. Dr. Klein's expression softened. We'll do everything we can, but they need to come with me now. Luna refused to move until Ethan whispered something in her ear. Walter couldn't hear what his grandson said, but the dog's ears perked up, and she allowed herself to be led to the veterinary vehicle, the other 3 dogs following. As the ambulance pulled away with David and the veterinary vehicle followed with the dogs, Walter stood in the rain with his grandson, both of them muddy, exhausted, and emotionally drained. Marcus stood with them, seemingly at a loss for words. How did you know, Ethan? Walter finally asked. How did you know their names? About David? About the puppies? Ethan looked up at him with those green eyes that held too much wisdom for a 5-year-old. I listened, Grandpa. They were telling anyone who would listen. We just had to hear them. The storm was finally beginning to break, the rain lessening to a drizzle. The collapsed mine looked like a wound in the mountainside, but Walter couldn't help thinking about what would have happened if they hadn't come. David would have died in that tunnel, alone, except for his loyal dogs. The dogs would have stayed with him until the end, and then they would have died too, trapped by their devotion. We should go to the hospital, Marcus said. Check on them. Walter nodded, but Ethan was already walking toward Marcus's truck. David needs to see Luna when he wakes up, the boy said with certainty. And Luna needs to know David's going to be okay. The drive to Cedar Ridge General Hospital was quiet except for the sound of the windshield wipers. Walter's mind was spinning with everything that had happened, trying to make sense of Ethan's impossible knowledge. He'd always known his grandson was special, but this was something beyond imagination. The hospital was in controlled chaos when they arrived. News of the rescue had already spread, and it seemed like half the town had shown up to see if they could help. Walter recognized faces from the grocery store, the post office, the diner where he and Ethan had breakfast every Sunday. Is it true? Mayor Davidson asked, approaching them in the lobby. A soldier was trapped in the mine for 2 weeks? Sergeant David Chen, Marcus confirmed. His dogs kept him alive. The mayor's assistant was already on her phone, and Walter heard her saying something about contacting the military base 2 hours away. This was becoming bigger than just a local story. They found David in the emergency room, surrounded by medical staff. He was conscious now, intravenous lines running into both arms, his leg in a temporary cast, but his eyes were wild with panic. My dogs, he was saying repeatedly. Where are my dogs? They're at the vet, a nurse was trying to explain. They're being taken care of. No, you don't understand. They won't eat if they think I've abandoned them. Luna, especially. She's pregnant. The stress could... David! Ethan's voice cut through the panic. The boy had somehow slipped past the nurses and was standing beside the bed. "Luna knows you're okay. I promised her I'd tell you something." David's eyes focused on the child, recognition dawning. "You're the boy. From the tunnel. You knew about the puppies." Ethan nodded solemnly. "Luna says to tell you she kept them safe, all 6 of them. Dr. Klein checked with a special machine and saw them. They're all okay." "6?" David's voice broke. "There are 6? 3 boys and 3 girls," Ethan said, though Walter had no idea how he could know the genders. "Luna says they're going to be special, like their mom." Tears were streaming down David's face now. "How do you know these things?" "I just do," Ethan said simply. "The same way Luna knew you were worth saving. The same way Max knew to check the stable parts of the tunnel. The same way Rex knew to take the pain so you wouldn't be alone. The same way Scout knew to find the water that kept you alive." David was sobbing now, 2 weeks of trauma and fear finally breaking through. "They're everything to me. After my son, after Jeremy died, they became my family." Walter felt his chest tighten. This man had lost a child too. The pain in David's voice was too familiar, too raw. "Luna says Jeremy would be proud of you," Ethan said quietly. "She says he visited you in the dark when you were scared. He told you to hold on. That help was coming." The emergency room went completely silent. Even the machines seemed to pause their beeping. David stared at Ethan with a mixture of shock and something that looked like hope. "Jeremy was autistic," David whispered. "He could talk to animals too. Everyone thought it was just his imagination, but I knew. I knew it was real. That's why I joined the K9 unit, to be closer to what he loved." A commotion in the hallway broke the moment. Dr. Klein appeared, and with her somehow was Luna. The dog was wearing a medical cone to prevent her from licking her IVS, but her tail was wagging so hard her whole body shook. "She broke out of her kennel, doctor," Klein explained, looking harassed but amused. "Opened 3 doors that I know I locked. The other 3 are raising hell because we separated them." "Let them come," David said immediately. "Please, they need to see I'm okay." Hospital policy was thrown out the window as Max, Rex, and Scout were brought in. Rex was limping, his shoulder wrapped in bandages, but his tail was wagging. The dogs surrounded David's bed, each finding a spot where they could touch him. Luna rested her head on his chest, and David buried his face in her fur, sobbing. "You saved me," he whispered. "All of you saved me." "Actually," Walter said, his voice rough with emotion, "they saved all of us." The story could have ended there, a miraculous rescue that brought a town together. But Ethan's connection with the dogs, and what happened next, would transform Cedar Ridge in ways no one could have imagined. Over the next few hours, as David was stabilized and prepared for surgery on his leg, the full story began to emerge. The military arrived, officials from the base's K9 unit who confirmed that David and his dogs had been on a training exercise, practicing search and rescue in abandoned structures. They'd been reported missing 2 weeks ago, but search efforts had focused on the wrong area due to a GPS malfunction. These dogs are certified in urban search and rescue, wilderness tracking, and avalanche recovery, Colonel Martinez explained to the growing crowd of townspeople and media that had gathered. They've saved 17 lives in active deployment. Sergeant Chen is one of our best handlers. But it was what Ethan said next that changed everything. "There are more people who need help," the boy announced suddenly, looking directly at Colonel Martinez. "Luna knows where they are, not in the mine, other places, lost places." The colonel looked skeptical, but David, despite being prepped for surgery, spoke up from his gurney. "Listen to him. This boy, he understands them in ways I've never seen. If he says Luna knows something, she does." "There's a girl," Ethan continued, his eyes taking on that distant look Walter was beginning to recognize. "She's been missing for 3 days. Everyone thinks she ran away, but she fell into an old well. Luna can smell her fear on the wind." The room erupted in discussion. There had indeed been a missing person report. 14-year-old Ashley Brennan, who'd had a fight with her parents and disappeared. Search teams had assumed she'd run away to a friend's house in another town. "Where?" Sheriff Coleman asked, having just arrived at the hospital. "If you know where she is." "Luna knows," Ethan corrected. "She'll show you, but she won't leave David." It was Dr. Klein who suggested the solution. "David's surgery isn't for another 2 hours. If we can transport him safely, keep him stable. And that's how, against all medical advice and common sense, a bizarre procession left Cedar Ridge General Hospital. David on a gurney, surrounded by medical equipment and staff. Luna leading the way, with Ethan's small hand on her collar. Max, Rex, and Scout forming their protective formation, and what seemed like half the town following behind. Luna led them 3 miles out of town, to an abandoned farmstead that had been searched already. But the dog went straight to an overgrown area behind the collapsed barn, where decades of vegetation had hidden an old stone well. "Ashley!" Sheriff Coleman called down into the darkness. A weak voice answered, "Help, please." "My leg." The rescue took 2 hours. Ashley had indeed fallen into the well during the storm, breaking her ankle. She'd survived on rainwater and sheer determination, her voice too weak to carry to the search teams that had passed within 50 yards of her location. When they pulled her up, hypothermic and dehydrated but alive, the crowd erupted in cheers. Ashley's parents fell to their knees, sobbing with relief. And Luna, despite her exhaustion and pregnancy, sat tall and proud, her tail wagging as Ethan whispered praise in her ear. "How?" Colonel Martinez asked Walter quietly. "How does your grandson do this?" Walter watched Ethan kneeling beside Luna, the boy's hands gentle on her swollen sides where her puppies grew. "I don't know. His mother used to say he was born with an old soul. Maybe some people just come into this world with gifts we don't understand." David's surgery was successful, though the doctors warned he might never regain full use of his leg. The infection had been severe, and there was nerve damage from the 2 weeks of compression. But when he woke up, the first thing he asked was, "My dogs?" They were all there, having refused to leave the hospital. The staff had given up trying to enforce visiting hours or animal policies. The 4 German shepherds had become local heroes, and no one had the heart to separate them from their handler. It was during David's recovery that the next revelation came. Ethan was visiting, as he did every day, sitting quietly beside Luna while she rested. The dog was getting close to her due date, her belly round with the 6 puppies she carried. "David," Ethan said suddenly, "Luna wants to know if you'll stay." David looked confused. "Stay where?" "Here, in Cedar Ridge. She says you don't have anywhere else anymore. Your apartment in the city. You gave it up before Jeremy got sick. You've been living at the base, but you don't want to go back." David's face went pale. No one knew about him giving up his apartment. He'd done it to pay for experimental treatments for Jeremy, treatments that ultimately hadn't worked. "How could you know that?" he whispered. "Luna knows everything about you," Ethan said simply. "She says you pretend to be okay, but you're not. You haven't been okay since Jeremy went to heaven, but maybe you could be okay here." Walter watched David's face crumble, the walls he'd built around his grief, finally breaking down. "I don't know how to be okay anymore," David admitted. "Jeremy was everything. These dogs, they're all I have left." "That's not true," Ethan said, with the certainty only a child could have. "You have us now, Grandpa and me. We're family now." Walter felt his throat close up. He wanted to protest, to say that they couldn't just adopt a stranger into their small family. But looking at David, broken and alone except for his dogs, he saw himself 3 years ago, lost, grieving, until Ethan had given him purpose again. "The boy's right," Walter said roughly. "We've got room. Nothing fancy, but there's space for you and the dogs while you recover." David looked between them, this old man and young boy who'd risked their lives to save him. "I couldn't impose—" "It's not imposing," Ethan interrupted. "Luna already decided. She wants her puppies to be born somewhere safe, with people who understand. And that's how David Chen and his 4 German shepherds came to live in the small house on Maple Street. Walter converted the garage into a recovery space for David, with easy access for his wheelchair and later his crutches. The dogs adapted immediately, as if they'd always belonged there. The town rallied around them. Donations poured in for David's medical bills and the dog's care. Dr. Klein provided free veterinary services, saying it was the least she could do for heroes. Marcus and his construction crew built a proper kennel area in the backyard for when the puppies arrived. But it was what happened with the puppies that truly showed Ethan's gift. Luna went into labor on a cold October night, 3 weeks after the rescue. Dr. Klein was there, ready to assist, but Luna would only let Ethan near her. "She says she's scared," Ethan reported, his small hand stroking Luna's head as contractions rippled through her body. "The first puppy? Something's wrong?" Dr. Klein examined Luna carefully. "He's right. The first puppy is breached. We might need to do a C-section." "No," Ethan said firmly. "Luna says she can do it. She needs to hear David's voice." David, still in his wheelchair, rolled closer. "Hey, beautiful girl. You're so brave, so strong. You saved me, remember? You can do this." What happened next, Doctor? Klein would later describe as miraculous. Luna's body seemed to relax, and with Ethan guiding her through some instinct no one could explain, she delivered the breech puppy successfully. It wasn't breathing at first, but Ethan knew exactly what to do, clearing its airways with gentle fingers, rubbing its tiny body until it squeaked its first breath. 6 puppies in total, just as Ethan had predicted. 3 males, 3 females. Each one perfect despite their mother's ordeal during pregnancy. "What should we name them?" David asked, watching the puppies nurse for the first time. Ethan looked at each puppy with that distant expression, as if listening to something only he could hear. "This one is Hope," he said, touching the smallest female. "Because Luna never gave up hope. This one is Courage, indicating the breached puppy who'd almost didn't make it. Faith, valor, honor, and spirit. Those are perfect," David said, tears running down his face. As the puppies grew, it became clear they had inherited their mother's intelligence and their father's strength. The father, they learned, had been another military dog named Titan, who died in service 2 months before David's accident. Luna had been carrying his legacy when she'd kept David alive, in that tunnel. Ethan worked with the puppies every day, somehow knowing exactly what each one needed. Hope, the smallest, would grow to be the most empathetic, able to sense seizures before they happened. Courage would become a search and rescue dog like his mother, fearless in the face of danger. Faith would work with traumatized children, her gentle nature perfect for therapy work. Valor would join the police force, his protective instincts unmatched. Honor would stay with David, becoming his service dog as he learned to walk again. And Spirit. Spirit would stay with Ethan. "She chose you," David explained when it became clear the puppy wouldn't leave Ethan's side. "Dogs know things we don't. She knows you need her as much as she needs you." The story of the rescue had spread beyond Cedar Ridge. News outlets picked it up, calling it the miracle of the mountain. Donations poured in, and not just for David and the dogs, but to establish a search and rescue training center in the town. David, despite his injury, would run it, teaching other handlers the bond he'd developed with his dogs. But the most remarkable moment came 6 months later, when the puppies were beginning their formal training. A massive earthquake hit a town 200 miles away, trapping dozens in collapsed buildings. The call went out for search and rescue teams, and David knew they had to go, even though the puppies were still young. "They're ready," Ethan said with complete confidence. "They were born for this." The rescue effort was the largest the state had seen in decades. Professional teams from across the region converged on the disaster zone. David, still walking with a cane, directed his dogs with Ethan by his side. The boy's parents would never have allowed it, but Walter understood that Ethan needed to be there, needed to use his gift. Luna found the first survivor, an elderly woman trapped in her bathroom for 36 hours. Max located 3 children in a collapsed daycare, protecting them with his body as rescuers dug them out. Rex, despite his shoulder never fully healing, discovered a pocket where 7 people had survived in a basement. Scout led teams to a pregnant woman who'd been given up for dead. But it was the puppies, working for the first time in a real disaster, who amazed everyone. Hope found a diabetic man just as he was going into a coma. Courage crawled into a space too small for adult dogs to reach twin babies. Faith calmed a traumatized child who wouldn't let anyone else near. Valor protected rescue workers from a secondary collapse. Honor stayed by David's side, helping him navigate the treacherous terrain despite his disability. And Spirit, with Ethan's small hands on her collar, led them to something no one expected. "There's someone else," Ethan announced on the 3rd day, when most hope of finding more survivors had faded. "Spirit says there's a voice calling, but it's very far down." The official search coordinator wanted to dismiss it. The area Ethan indicated had been checked multiple times, but David had learned to trust the boy's gift. They dug for 6 hours, following Spirit's insistent barking and Ethan's quiet directions. To the left, no, deeper. There's a metal thing in the way. When they finally broke through, they found a maintenance tunnel that no one knew existed, not on any building plans. Inside, trapped but alive, were 5 construction workers who'd been doing unauthorized overtime when the earthquake hit. They'd survived on emergency supplies, but their air was running out. The rescue made national news. The image of 5-year-old Ethan with Spirit, surrounded by the heroic dogs who'd saved so many lives, became iconic. But for Walter, watching his grandson work with these animals, seeing the purpose and joy in the boy's eyes, the real miracle was more personal. Ethan had lost his parents, but he'd found his calling. David had lost his son, but he'd found a new family. The dogs had lost their home in that collapsed tunnel, but they'd gained an entire town that loved them. The earthquake rescue had changed everything. As Walter drove them back to Cedar Ridge, Ethan asleep in the back seat with Spirit curled against him, David stared out the window at the mountains that had nearly killed him 6 months ago. His leg ached, it always would, but the pain felt different now. It felt like a reminder of survival rather than loss. 23 people, David said quietly, not wanting to wake Ethan. Your grandson helped save 23 people. Walter's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He's different now, more focused. It's like he finally understands what his gift is for. Neither of them could have imagined what was coming next. The call came just as they pulled into town, David's phone buzzing with an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, exhausted from 3 days of rescue work, but something made him pick up. Sergeant Chen, this is Director Patricia Hawkins from the National Search and Rescue Foundation. We've been following your team's work. We need to talk about your dogs and about the boy. David felt ice in his veins. What about them? There's been an incident. 4 military dogs have gone missing during a training exercise in Riverside Canyon. We have reason to believe they're trapped, possibly injured. The terrain is too unstable for human teams. We've seen what your dogs can do, what the boy can do. We need you. David looked at Walter, who'd heard enough to understand. They both turned to look at Ethan, still sleeping peacefully, unaware that his gift was about to be tested in ways none of them could imagine. When? David asked. Now. A storm system is moving in. If those dogs are injured and exposed, they won't survive the night. The decision should have been difficult. Ethan was just a child, already exhausted from the earthquake rescue. But Spirit had woken up, her ears perked, and she was already nudging Ethan awake with her nose. Someone needs help, Ethan said groggily. Then his eyes snapped fully open. Dogs! 4 of them. They're scared. Walter wanted to say no, to protect his grandson from whatever danger this might bring. But he saw the determination in Ethan's eyes, the same look his mother used to get when someone needed help. We'll be there in 2 hours, David told Director Hawkins. Riverside Canyon was a gash in the earth, 40 miles from Cedar Ridge. The military used it for extreme terrain training, its maze of ravines and unstable cliff faces perfect for testing both dogs and handlers. But the recent rains had made it a death trap. They arrived to find a command post already set up, military vehicles and personnel everywhere. Colonel Martinez was there, his face grim. The dogs were part of an experimental program, he explained, leading them to a tactical map. Enhanced training from birth, selected for intelligence and problem-solving abilities. They were conducting a night navigation exercise when a cliff face gave way. Their handler, Sergeant Williams, was airlifted out with critical injuries. He was unconscious, couldn't tell us where exactly the dogs were when it happened. Luna pressed against David's leg, whining softly. The other dogs were alert, tense, reading the anxiety in the air. Their names are Phantom, Ghost, Shadow, and Wraith, Colonel Martinez continued. They're all German shepherds, siblings from the same litter. 3 years old. Without their handler, they won't trust anyone else. They're trained to hide from strangers. They're hurt, Ethan said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at the small boy. Spirit can feel them. They're in pain and confused. One of them, Shadow. His back legs aren't working right. Director Hawkins stepped forward, a stern woman in her 50s who looked like she didn't believe in nonsense. How could you possibly know that? The same way I knew David was in the mine, Ethan said simply. The same way Luna knew to keep him alive. Dogs know things. They tell each other things. We just have to listen. David knelt beside Ethan, his bad leg protesting. Can you find them? Ethan looked at Spirit, then at Luna and the others. Not me. Them. But I can help them understand what the lost dogs are saying. The canyon was even worse than the briefing had suggested. Recent rains had turned stable paths into mudslides. Rock faces that had stood for centuries were crumbling. The helicopter that had rescued Sergeant Williams couldn't fly in the increasing wind, and the storm clouds gathering overhead promised more rain within hours. This is insane, one of the military handlers said. Sending a child down there? The child isn't going anywhere, Walter said firmly. He stays up here where it's safe. The dogs go down with David and whoever else knows the terrain, but Ethan shook his head. I have to go part of the way. The dogs need me to understand what they're hearing. Once they know where to go, I can come back up. The argument might have continued, but Luna suddenly barked, sharp and urgent. She was staring into the canyon, her body rigid with attention. Max, Rex, and Scout immediately joined her, all focused on the same point. They hear them, Ethan whispered. The lost dogs are calling, but they're using sounds humans can't hear. Luna says they're deeper than anyone thinks. There's a cave system. Colonel Martinez checked his maps. There are no caves marked in that section. There are now, Ethan said with certainty. The earthquake last month opened something new. That's where they went when the cliff collapsed, but Shadow can't move, and the others won't leave him. The rescue plan was hastily assembled. David would lead Luna and Max down into the canyon, following the path Ethan described. Rex and Scout would stay with search and rescue team members at strategic points, ready to relay signals. Spirit would stay with Ethan at the observation point, helping him interpret what the other dogs were communicating. The path is there, Ethan said, pointing to what looked like an impossible route down the cliff face. Luna can see it, 20 feet down, then traverse left to that ledge. There's a goat trail behind those rocks. The military handlers were skeptical until Luna began descending exactly as Ethan described, finding footholds that were invisible from above. David followed, his injured leg making every step agony, but he refused to let anyone else lead his dogs. Shadow's getting weaker, Ethan reported, his hand on Spirit's head. The others are trying to keep him warm, but he's lost a lot of blood. Walter watched his grandson work, amazed at the transformation. The shy, grieving boy who'd barely spoken after his parents' death was now confidently directing a complex rescue operation, translating between species as naturally as breathing. 40 minutes into the descent, David's radio crackled. We found the cave. You were right, it's recent. The opening is barely visible, partially collapsed. Luna's indicating they're inside, but his voice trailed off. What is it? Colonel Martinez demanded. The cave entrance is unstable. Really unstable. One wrong move, and the whole thing comes down. Ethan closed his eyes, his connection with Spirit deepening. Phantom is the leader. He's the biggest. He's standing guard at the entrance, but he won't let anyone pass. He doesn't trust humans. Anymore, not after his handler left him. His handler was unconscious, Director Hawkins protested. He didn't have a choice. Phantom doesn't understand that, Ethan explained patiently. He just knows he was abandoned when Shadow got hurt. He thinks humans will take them away from each other. David's voice came through the radio again. Luna's trying to approach, but Phantom's showing aggression. These dogs are trained to defend. If he attacks, tell Luna to show him her puppies, Ethan interrupted urgently. Not real ones, but tell her to remember when they were in her belly. Tell her to show Phantom that feeling. There was skepticism in the silence that followed, but David had learned to trust Ethan's instincts. They heard him speaking softly to Luna over the radio, and then, miraculously, David reported, he's backing down. Phantom's letting Luna approach. It's like she's comforting him. Max needs to go in first, Ethan continued, his voice taking on that distant quality that meant he was deep in communication with the dogs. He's smaller, less threatening. Phantom will accept him, then Luna, then David. The next hour was torture for those waiting above. The radio updates were sparse, David needing all his concentration to navigate the unstable cave. The storm was moving in faster than predicted, the first drops of rain starting to fall. We need to abort, someone from the military team said. If that cave floods, 5 more minutes, Ethan pleaded. They've almost got Shadow. He's scared. He can't feel his back legs and he thinks he's dying. Ghost and Wraith won't leave him. They're all pressed together, trying to keep him warm. Walter put his hand on his grandson's shoulder, feeling the boy trembling with the effort of maintaining his connection across such distance. Ethan, you're pushing too hard. I can't stop now, Grandpa. They need me. Then David's voice, tight with urgency. We have them. Shadow's in bad shape, definitely spinal injury. The others are dehydrated but mobile. But this cave is coming down. The rain's making everything shift. Get out now, Colonel Martinez ordered. What followed was the longest 15 minutes of Walter's life. The rain had become a downpour, turning the canyon into a waterfall. They could hear rocks falling, the echo of collapses throughout the ravine. Ethan stood at the edge, Spirit beside him, both soaked to the skin but refusing to move. They're coming, Ethan whispered. Luna's showing them the way. Phantom's helping carry Shadow. They're all working together. Through the rain, they finally saw movement. Luna emerged first, followed by Max, then 2 unfamiliar German shepherds, Ghost and Wraith, Walter assumed. Behind them, David appeared, and with him, Phantom, the largest German shepherd Walter had ever seen, helping to support a makeshift stretcher carrying Shadow. The medical team rushed forward, but Phantom growled, placing himself between them and his injured brother. Let me, Ethan said, walking forward slowly. He was so small compared to the massive dog, but he showed no fear. Phantom, I know you're scared. I know you think humans let you down, but Shadow needs help, and these people want to save him, just like you've been trying to save him. Phantom stared at the boy, and something passed between them that Walter couldn't understand but could feel. The dog stepped aside, allowing the veterinary team to take Shadow. Paralysis from the mid-spine down, Doctor, Klein announced, having arrived with the emergency team. But the spinal cord isn't severed. With surgery and therapy, he might walk again. He will walk, Ethan said with quiet certainty. Spirit says so. She can see it. The transport back to the emergency veterinary hospital was a convoy of vehicles, each dog with their own handler, though Phantom refused to leave Shadow's side. Ethan rode with them, his small hand on Phantom's head, whispering reassurances. The surgery took 6 hours. The waiting room was packed. Military personnel, townspeople who'd heard about the rescue, media who'd gotten wind of another miracle involving the boy who could talk to dogs. Walter tried to shield Ethan from the attention, but the boy was focused entirely on Phantom, Ghost, and Wraith, who hadn't moved from the surgery door. They're telling each other stories, Ethan said quietly to David, about when they were puppies, about their mother. They're trying to be brave for Shadow. David watched the 3 dogs, saw the way they touched noses occasionally, the subtle shifts in their posture. I believe you, he said simply. After everything I've seen, how could I not? When Dr. Klein finally emerged, exhausted but smiling, the entire room held its breath. The surgery was successful. The damage wasn't as severe as we feared. With proper therapy, Shadow has a good chance of regaining mobility. Phantom let out a sound that was part whine, part howl, and his brothers joined him. It was mournful and hopeful at the same time, and several people in the waiting room found themselves wiping away tears. Can we see him? Ethan asked. Dr. Klein hesitated. He's still sedated. They need to smell him, Ethan insisted, to know he's really alive. Otherwise, they'll think you're lying. Once again, protocol was bent for the boy with the gift. The 3 dogs were allowed into recovery, where they arranged themselves around Shadow's unconscious form. Phantom licked his brother's face gently, then settled with his head on Shadow's shoulder. They'll stay like that until he wakes up, Ethan told Dr. Klein. They're telling him they're here, that he's safe. Colonel Martinez approached Walter while Ethan was with the dogs. Your grandson? What he can do? It's unprecedented. The military applications alone. He's 5 years old, Walter said sharply. He's not a tool for the military or anyone else. That's not what I meant, the colonel said, raising his hands peacefully. I meant we should document this, study it. Other children might have similar abilities that go unrecognized. Think of how many lives could be saved. Before Walter could respond, A commotion erupted outside. Through the windows, they could see news vans arriving, reporters setting up cameras. Someone had leaked the story of the rescue, of the boy who could communicate with dogs saving military animals. "We need to get Ethan out of here," David said, rolling his wheelchair over despite his exhaustion. "This kind of attention, it's too much for a child." But Ethan had already seen the crowds gathering. He stood between Phantom and the window, his small face serious. "They want to understand," he said, "but they're looking at the wrong thing." "What do you mean?" Walter asked. "They think I'm special, but I'm not. The dogs are special. Everyone can hear them if they really listen. People just forgot how." Director Hawkins had been quiet throughout the evening, observing everything with sharp eyes. Now she stepped forward. "Ethan, would you be willing to teach others? Not now, but when you're older. What you did today saved 4 highly trained military dogs worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in training. More importantly, you saved 4 lives that matter to their handlers and to each other." "I'm already teaching," Ethan said, looking at David. "David's learning. He hears Luna better now than before. And the puppies, hope, courage, faith, valor, honor, and spirit, they're teaching too. They show people every day that animals aren't just pets, they're partners." The media attention became unavoidable. Within hours, the story was national news. "Boy who speaks to dogs. Saves military K-9 unit" ran in headlines across the country. Social media exploded with videos of Ethan directing the rescue, of Phantom accepting his help, of Shadow's brothers maintaining their vigil. Walter tried to protect Ethan from the chaos, but the boy seemed strangely calm about it all. "Mom told me once that gifts weren't meant to be hidden," he said that night as Walter tucked him into bed, Spirit curled at his feet. "She said if you can help, you should help. Your mom was wise," Walter said, his throat tight with emotion. "She still is," Ethan said matter-of-factly. "She visits sometimes, like Jeremy visits David. They don't say words, but they're here." Walter didn't know what to say to that, so he just kissed his grandson's forehead and turned out the light. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Sergeant Williams, Shadow's original handler, arrived in a wheelchair, his head bandaged but his eyes clear. He'd discharged himself from the hospital against medical advice when he heard his dogs had been found. "I need to see them," he said desperately. "They must think I abandoned them." Ethan took his hand without hesitation. "They understand you were hurt. Phantom was just scared. Come on, I'll show you." The reunion was emotional beyond words. Phantom, who'd been so aggressive with strangers, practically collapsed when he saw Williams, crawling on his belly to press against his handler's legs. Ghost and Wraith joined him, all 3 dogs whimpering and licking whatever part of Williams they could reach. "I'm so sorry," Williams kept saying. "I'm so sorry I left you." Shadow was awake now, though still unable to move his back legs. When Williams was wheeled into his recovery room, the dog's tail, the only part below his injury that still had movement, began wagging frantically. "Hey, buddy," Williams whispered, carefully laying his hand on Shadow's head. "You're going to be okay. We're going to get through this together." Ethan watched the reunion with a small smile. Shadow says he's not scared anymore. He knows Williams won't leave him again. "How do you know that?" Williams asked, looking at the boy with wonder. "The same way you know Shadow would never leave you," Ethan replied. "Love doesn't need words." The recovery process for Shadow became a community effort. The town of Cedar Ridge, already invested in David's dogs, embraced these new additions. A physical therapy pool was donated for Shadow's rehabilitation. Local businesses took turns providing food for the dogs. Children made get-well cards that were pinned up in Shadow's recovery room. But it was the relationship between the 2 groups of dogs that amazed everyone. Luna took Phantom under her wing, showing him that trust could be rebuilt. Max worked with Ghost on agility exercises, helping him regain confidence after the trauma. Rex and Wraith became inseparable, the older dog's calm demeanor soothing the younger's anxiety. Scout divided his time between all of them, a gentle presence that seemed to understand exactly what each dog needed. And the puppies, now 6 months old and in various stages of training, treated the new dogs like family. Hope would lie beside Shadow during his therapy sessions, her presence seeming to give him strength. Courage played with Ghost and Wraith, reminding them how to be joyful. Faith sat with Phantom when his protective instincts became overwhelming, teaching him that guarding didn't always mean aggression. "They're healing each other," David observed one afternoon, watching the dogs interact in the yard they had built behind the training center. Not just physically, but emotionally. Ethan nodded, sitting beside Shadow's therapy pool as the dog attempted to paddle with his front legs while his back legs were supported by a special harness. Dogs don't hold on to hurt the same way people do. They live right now, not yesterday or tomorrow. It was 3 months before Shadow took his first unassisted step. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning, with only Ethan, Williams, and Dr. Klein present. Shadow had been showing increased sensation in his back legs, muscle twitches that suggested healing, but no one wanted to get their hopes up too high. Ethan was sitting on the floor, Spirit beside him, when Shadow suddenly shifted. His back legs, which had been limp for months, pushed against the ground. It wasn't much, just a small movement, but it was voluntary. "Did you see that?" Williams breathed, afraid to speak too loudly and break whatever spell was happening. Shadow tried again, this time managing to shift his weight. His legs shook with the effort, muscles that hadn't been used in months protesting. But he kept trying, his eyes fixed on Phantom, who was watching from across the room. "He wants to walk to his brother," Ethan said softly. "Phantom's been sad, thinking Shadow will never run with him again. Shadow wants to show him he's wrong." It took 20 minutes for Shadow to cover the 10 feet between him and Phantom. 20 minutes of trembling effort, of Williams crying silently, of Dr. Klein documenting every miraculous movement. When Shadow finally reached Phantom and the two dogs touched noses, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. "He did it," Williams whispered. "He actually did it." "He's not done yet," Ethan said with a smile. "Spirit says Shadow's going to run again. Maybe not as fast as before, but he'll run." The video of Shadow's first steps went viral within hours. #Shadow Walks became a trending hashtag. Donations poured in for the rehabilitation center, enough to expand the facilities and help more injured service dogs. But fame brought complications. People started showing up at the center, claiming their dogs were special too, demanding that Ethan read their pets. Some were genuine, desperate pet owners hoping for help. Others were clearly trying to exploit the situation for attention or money. "We need boundaries," Walter told David one evening as they watched Ethan work with the dogs. The boy was exhausted, dark circles under his eyes from trying to help everyone who asked. "This is too much for him." David agreed. "We need to formalize this somehow. Create a program where Ethan can help without being overwhelmed." The solution came from an unexpected source. Director Hawkins returned with a proposal from the National Search and Rescue Foundation. They wanted to create a youth program, teaching children to work with rescue dogs, with Ethan as the pilot participant and eventual youth instructor. He wouldn't be obligated to do anything, Hawkins explained, but it would give structure to his gift, protection from exploitation, and a way to help more people without burning out. Walter was skeptical, but Ethan was interested. Could Shadow and the others help teach too? They know what it's like to be scared and hurt and then get better. Absolutely, Hawkins said. In fact, that's part of the proposal. Creating a therapy program where recovered service dogs help train new ones, with handlers who understand the psychological aspects of trauma and recovery. The program launched 6 months later, with Cedar Ridge becoming home to the National Youth K-9 Training Initiative. Ethan was the youngest participant, but his abilities made him a natural teacher for the older children who came to learn. "Don't try to talk to them with your head," he would tell the students. "Talk to them with your heart." Dogs don't care about words, they care about feelings. One student, a 12-year-old girl named Maria, who'd been mute since witnessing a car accident, formed an immediate bond with Faith. Within weeks, she was communicating through the dog, using hand signals and body language that Faith somehow translated into action. "She says Maria wants to be a vet," Ethan told Walter one day, watching Maria work with Faith on basic medical training. "Not with words, but Faith knows." 3 months into the program, Maria spoke her first word in 2 years, faith. Her parents sobbed when they heard it, and Faith, as if understanding the magnitude of the moment, placed her paw gently on Maria's hand. Stories like Maria's became common. Children who'd been labeled as difficult, antisocial, or learning disabled flourished in the program. They learned to read the dog's body language, to communicate through touch and presence rather than words. And the dogs, especially those who'd experienced trauma like Shadow's group, seemed to understand these children in ways that defied explanation. "It's not magic," Ethan would insist when reporters asked about the program's success. "It's just listening. Really listening." Shadow's recovery continued to amaze everyone. Within 6 months, he was not only walking, but beginning to run. His gait was different than before, a slight hitch in his back legs that would probably never go away, but he could keep up with his brothers on modified patrol exercises. Williams had been medically discharged from the military due to his head injury, but he stayed in Cedar Ridge, working with David at the training center. Together, they developed new protocols for working with traumatized service dogs, techniques that were adopted by military and civilian programs nationwide. "We're not just training dogs," Williams said at a conference, Shadow sitting proudly beside him. "We're healing partnerships. Every dog that's been injured in service has a handler who feels that injury too. Healing has to happen together." The puppies were now fully grown, each excelling in their chosen fields. Hope had indeed become a seizure alert dog, saving her assigned child's life multiple times. Courage had his first successful rescue, finding a hiker who'd fallen into a ravine. Faith worked full-time at a children's hospital, bringing comfort to the sick and scared. Valor had joined the police force, his keen instincts already earning him commendations. Honor never left David's side, helping him navigate both his physical limitations and his emotional ones. And Spirit remained with Ethan, the two of them so in sync that watching them work together was like watching a single being with two bodies. "She's not just my dog," Ethan explained to a documentary crew that had come to film the program. "She's my translator. She helps me understand what other dogs are saying, and she helps them understand me." The documentary, titled "The Language of Love, The Boy Who Speaks to Dogs," aired nationally and brought even more attention to the program. But it also brought something unexpected. Other children with similar abilities. A boy from Texas who could predict weather changes by watching birds. A girl from Maine who knew when whales were in distress. Twins from California who worked with horses in a way that defied conventional training methods. "We're not unique," Ethan told Walter, as they read letters from these children and their families. "There are lots of us. We just needed someone to say it was okay to be different." Walter felt a pride that went bone deep. His grandson had not only found his purpose, but was helping others find theirs too. The broken, grieving child who'd barely spoken after his parents' death had become a beacon of hope for children and animals alike. 1 year after Shadow's rescue, they held a celebration at the training center. All the dogs were there. Luna and her puppies, Max, Rex, Scout, Shadow, and his brothers. The yard was full of families whose lives had been touched by the program. Williams stood to speak, Shadow beside him, without any support harness, standing tall and proud. "A year ago, I thought I'd lost everything. My career, my purpose, my dogs. But this place, these people, and especially one very special little boy, showed me that endings can be beginnings." He looked at Ethan, who was sitting with Spirit and several younger children he was teaching. "Ethan, you saved more than just dogs that day in the canyon. You saved the people who love them. You saved me." The crowd erupted in applause, but Ethan seemed embarrassed by the attention. He whispered something to Spirit, who barked once, and suddenly all the dogs in the yard began howling, a joyful, harmonious sound that sent chills down everyone's spine. "They're saying thank you," Ethan translated, smiling. "To all of you, for seeing them as more than just animals, for understanding that they have hearts and souls and families, just like us." As the celebration continued, Walter found himself standing with David, watching Ethan teach a new group of children how to approach Luna's latest litter. She'd had another 6 puppies with a carefully selected mate, puppies that would go on to be service dogs across the country. "He's going to change the world," David said quietly. "He already has," Walter replied, thinking of all the lives touched, all the connections made, all the healing that had happened, because one little boy heard a dog crying in a storm and refused to walk away. But the biggest change was yet to come. 6 months later, on a cold December morning, Ethan woke up with a certainty that made him shake. "Something bad is coming," he told Walter, Spirit pacing anxiously beside him. "All the dogs feel it. Something really bad." Walter wanted to dismiss it as a nightmare, but he'd learned to trust Ethan's instincts. Within hours, every dog at the training center was showing signs of distress. Luna wouldn't eat. Shadow kept trying to herd his brothers into the safest part of their kennel. The puppies huddled together, whimpering. "What are they sensing?" David asked, watching the dogs with growing concern. "Danger," Ethan said, his face pale. "But not here. Somewhere else. Somewhere with lots of people." The earthquake hit the city 200 miles away at 2:47 that afternoon. 7.2 on the Richter scale. Buildings collapsed, highways buckled, thousands were trapped. The call came within minutes. Every available search and rescue team was needed. David looked at his dogs, at Shadow, who'd only been fully mobile for a few months, at the year-old puppies who'd never faced anything of this magnitude. "We have to go," he said. "All of us," Ethan added. "They all want to help." The scene at the disaster zone was apocalyptic. Buildings reduced to rubble, cars crushed like tin cans, the air filled with dust and the sounds of sirens and screams. But Ethan stood calm in the chaos, Spirit beside him, the other dogs arranged around them like a living shield. "There," he pointed to a collapsed apartment building. "Luna says there are children in the basement, alive but scared." Luna led the team unerringly to a pocket in the rubble where 6 children were huddled with their daycare teacher. They'd been playing in the basement when the earthquake hit, the reinforced play area saving their lives. Shadow, despite his injury, found an elderly couple trapped in their car under an overpass. His brothers worked as a perfect team, Phantom clearing debris, Ghost squeezing into tight spaces, Wraith standing guard. The puppies, no longer puppies but young adults, each had their moment. Hope alerted to a diabetic woman going into shock. Courage crawled through unstable rubble to reach a baby whose cries no one else could hear. Faith calmed panicked survivors. Valor protected rescue workers from looters. Honor helped David navigate the treacherous terrain despite his permanent limp. And Spirit, always with Ethan, seemed to be everywhere at once, coordinating the other dogs like a 4-legged general. But it was what happened on the 3rd day that would be remembered forever. Ethan suddenly stopped in front of a collapsed office building that had already been searched. "There's someone down there. Deep down. They're different." "Different how?" the incident commander asked, exhausted and skeptical. "They can't hear or speak," Ethan said, "so they couldn't call for help. But they're tapping. The dogs can feel the vibrations. The rescue took 18 hours. They had to shore up unstable sections, drill through reinforced concrete, work around broken gas lines. But when they finally broke through, they found a deaf janitor who'd been trapped in a reinforced storage room. He'd been tapping SOS and Morse code for 3 days, hoping someone would feel the vibrations. When they brought him up, he signed something to Ethan. The boy didn't know sign language, but Spirit seemed to understand, pressing against the man's legs in comfort. "He says thank you for listening when he couldn't speak," a translator explained. The man then did something that made headlines around the world. He knelt down and hugged each dog, tears streaming down his face. The photo of him surrounded by the heroic dogs, with small Ethan in the center, became one of the most shared images of the year. In total, the dogs saved 43 people in that disaster, but the impact went far beyond the numbers. The footage of Ethan working with the dogs, of Shadow overcoming his disability to save lives, of the puppies Luna had carried through trauma, now saving others from their own trauma, it changed how people saw service animals. Donations poured in from around the world. The training center in Cedar Ridge expanded into a full campus. Programs were started in other cities, all based on the model Ethan and David had developed. The military officially adopted their trauma recovery protocols. Schools began teaching children to respect and understand animal intelligence. But for Ethan, the biggest moment came 6 months later, when a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a collar, old, worn, with a tag that read Jeremy. David broke down when he saw it. "This was my son's dog's collar, Bailey. She died the same week Jeremy did. I buried this collar with him." There was a note in a child's handwriting. "Jeremy says Bailey is with him, and they're both proud of what you're doing. He says to give this to Ethan, because he understands the language of love too." They never found out who sent it, though Walter suspected it was another child with a gift like Ethan's. David had the collar framed and hung in the training center, beneath a photo of all the dogs and their handlers. Years passed. Ethan grew from a gifted child into a remarkable young man, Though he never lost his ability to hear what animals were saying, he developed the gift into a science, working with researchers to understand the subtle cues that most people missed. His work led to breakthrough programs for autistic children, for trauma victims, for anyone who struggled with traditional communication. Luna lived to be 14, passing peacefully with Ethan and David by her side. Her legacy lived on through her puppies, and the hundreds of dogs trained using the methods she'd helped develop. A statue of her now stands at the entrance to the training center, with a plaque that reads, "Luna, Mother, Hero, Teacher." She saved one man and changed the world. Shadow recovered fully enough to work another 5 years before retiring. He spent his last years as a therapy dog, visiting hospitals and schools, showing children that disabilities didn't mean the end of usefulness or joy. When he passed at age 11, Williams had his ashes scattered in Riverside Canyon, where he'd been rescued, transforming a place of trauma into one of peace. The other dogs all lived full lives, working until they couldn't, then retiring to the center where they helped train the next generation. Max, Rex, and Scout became known as the Three Wise Men, elder statesmen of the dog world who seemed to pass on their knowledge to younger dogs. Phantom, Ghost, and Wraith continued working with Williams in specialized military rescue operations until age forced their retirement. The puppies, Hope, Courage, Faith, Valor, Honor, and Spirit, each became legendary in their own fields. Hope detected over 100 seizures before they happened. Courage saved 37 people in various disasters. Faith helped countless children through trauma. Valor solved cold cases with his incredible nose. Honor gave David the mobility and confidence to live fully despite his injury. And Spirit? Spirit stayed with Ethan always, their bond deepening with each passing year. She was there when he graduated high school, when he got his degree in animal behavior, when he married Maria, the girl who'd been mute until Faith helped her find her voice again. Spirit was there when Ethan's own children were born, and she was the one who first noticed that his daughter had the same gift he did. "She hears them too," Ethan told Walter, now in his 80s but still sharp, as they watched 2-year-old Emma playing with Spirit's puppies. The gift didn't skip a generation. "Good," Walter said, his voice rough with age and emotion. "The world needs more people who can listen." The training center had become an international destination, with programs in 17 countries. Thousands of dogs had been trained there, and tens of thousands of lives saved. But more importantly, it had changed how humanity saw its relationship with animals. "We're not their owners," Ethan would tell every new class of students. "We're their partners. They have voices. We just have to learn their language." On the 20th anniversary of the mine rescue that started it all, they held a massive reunion. Handlers and dogs from around the world came to Cedar Ridge. The town that had once been known for nothing was now famous as the place where the human-animal bond had been redefined. Ethan, now 25, stood before the crowd with Spirit, gray-muzzled but still proud, beside him. Emma was there too, already showing an uncanny ability to understand what animals were thinking, playing with the latest generation of puppies. 20 years ago, my grandfather and I heard a dog crying in a storm," Ethan began. "We could have walked away. It would have been safer, easier, but something made us listen. That decision to listen, to really hear what those dogs were saying, changed everything." He looked at David, now in his 50s, standing with honor and surrounded by dogs he'd trained, at Williams with a new generation of military dogs, at Maria, his wife, with Faith's daughter at her side, at all the faces of people whose lives had been touched by this journey. Every day, animals are trying to tell us things. About danger, about love, about loyalty, about hope. They're trying to teach us that communication doesn't require words, that love doesn't need language, that connection happens in the spaces between heartbeats. Spirit barked once, and every dog in the gathering responded, creating a chorus that echoed off the mountains. "They're saying thank you," Ethan translated, tears in his eyes. "Thank you for finally listening." The story that began with a collapsed mine and 4 trapped dogs had become something none of them could have imagined. It wasn't just about rescue anymore. It was about recognition, recognizing that animals were sentient beings with their own thoughts, fears, loves, and dreams. It was about respect, respecting the bonds between species and the wisdom each could offer the other. And it was about responsibility, the responsibility humans had to protect and partner with the creatures who shared their world. As the celebration continued into the night, with dogs and humans mingling freely, playing, working, simply being together, Walter sat on the same bench where he'd first heard Ethan say someone needed help. He thought about his daughter, Ethan's mother, and how proud she would be of what her son had become. "You did good, kid," he said to the wind, hoping somehow she could hear him. "You raised a boy who changed the world." A warm breeze touched his face, and for just a moment, he could swear he heard her voice. "He had a good teacher, Dad. He had you." Spirit came over and rested her head on Walter's knee, her eyes knowing and kind. And in that moment, Walter understood what Ethan had been trying to tell them all along. Love didn't need words. It just needed an open heart and a willingness to listen. The program Ethan started has now saved over 10,000 lives. The methods he developed are taught in veterinary schools worldwide. The children he trained have gone on to become leaders in animal behavior, conservation, and rescue operations. But perhaps the greatest legacy is the shift in consciousness, the understanding that animals are not lesser beings but different beings, with their own forms of intelligence and communication. Emma, now 5, the same age Ethan was when he saved Luna, recently had her own moment. A dolphin stranded on a beach was thought to be dying, but Emma insisted it was trying to communicate something. She sat with it for hours, her little hands on its skin, until she suddenly announced, "Her baby is stuck on the reef." She came to ask for help. The rescue team found the baby dolphin exactly where Emma said it would be, tangled in fishing net on a reef a mile offshore. Both mother and baby survived, and the video of them reuniting in Sitzi's the waves, with Emma watching from the beach, became another viral reminder of the connection between species. "She's even stronger than I was," Ethan told reporters. "The next generation always is. They grow up knowing what we had to learn, that every creature has a voice worth hearing." The ripples continue to spread. Military programs now include animal communication training. Schools teach empathy through animal interaction. Therapy programs use the human-animal bond to heal trauma that traditional methods couldn't touch. And in Cedar Ridge, the small mountain town that became the center of a revolution in understanding, the work continues. Every morning, Ethan walks through the training center, Spirit's daughter Harmony at his side, checking on the dogs in various stages of training and recovery. He stops at Luna's statue, touching the bronze nose that's been polished bright by thousands of hands over the years. "We kept our promise," he tells her. "We listened. And we taught others to listen too." In the end, that's what it was all about. Not the rescues, though, those mattered. Not the fame, though that helped spread the message. It was about a fundamental shift in how humanity saw its place in the world, not as masters, but as partners in the great dance of life. The boy who heard dogs crying in a storm had become a man who taught the world to listen. And in learning to hear what animals were saying, humanity had learned something even more important: how to speak the universal language of compassion. As this story spreads across the world, touching hearts and changing minds, remember that you too have the ability to listen, to understand, to connect with the creatures around you. They're waiting for you to hear them, to see them not as pets or tools, but as fellow souls sharing this journey through life. The 4 German shepherds found in that collapsed tunnel 20 years ago started something that can never be stopped. The recognition that love needs no words, that heroism comes in all forms, and that sometimes the smallest among us can lift the heaviest burdens. If this story touched your heart, if it made you look at your own pets differently, if it reminded you of the profound connections possible between species, please share it with others, like and subscribe. To spread this message of hope and understanding, comment below with your own stories of animal connection. Because every story shared brings us closer to a world where all voices are heard and valued. Remember Ethan's words. They're telling anyone who will listen. We just have to hear them. Thank you for reading, for listening, and for being part of this journey. Together, we can create a world where every creature's voice matters, where empathy bridges species, and where love truly needs no language. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Let us know where you're watching from, and share your own experiences with the amazing animals in your life. Because every connection matters, every story counts, and every voice, whether it barks, meows, chirps, or speaks, deserves to be heard.